He's Henry Gomez, an advertising strategist with over 25 years of experience.
And he's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief. And together we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. Well, Howard, today we've got a special guest here on the screen, old friend of mine, Vivek Kuchibhotla of BFC Ideas. Vivek, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do now?
Excellent. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Howard. First of all, it's Vivek Kuchibhotla for those who are struggling with the pronunciation. I have a consultancy that's called BFC Ideas, Better, Faster, Cheaper Ideas, that focuses on helping advertisers and agencies come to better ideas faster. I started my career sometime last century. I worked 10 years in brand management in Unilever Kellogg. And then for reasons that to this day are unclear, I moved to the advertising side and I spent 10 years in account management. My last job in account management was running McDonald's internationally, which gave me all the gray hairs that I have and helped me decide that a career change was necessary. And I've spent the last 20 years doing training within the advertising marketing space. So if nothing else, you know that I'm a really, really old guy.
Well, Vivek, we're really excited to have you here and thank you for being our inaugural guest. We were talking for quite a while before we started recording, so we've got a sense of what your thinking is, and we're both fascinated in good ways and others about your approach to ideation and the creative brief. So in a brief way, tell us what you think about the creative brief process, what's working and what's not working.
Well, first of all, I'd like to applaud both of you guys for your efforts to streamline the creative brief process. I agree with most of the things that you've put forward in your podcast. But I think that there's a fundamental issue with the process, and that it was developed decades, 30, 40 years ago. And the premise of this process is that it's linear, that one person does one thing, hands it off to someone else who does something else, and so on and so forth until it's presented to the client. And hopefully it's approved, but more often than not, it comes back to square one and we start this process again. It's extremely inefficient. And nowadays, with the resource limitations that agencies have to deal with, we can no longer afford to work this inefficiently. So what I propose is a different approach altogether. It's an approach that's more collaborative. It's an approach that focuses less on documents and more on ideas. And it's an approach where the 3 key stakeholders in the process, the account management people, the planners, and the creatives, come together, use creative thinking techniques to generate a large number of ideas. And then once they have these ideas, they compare them to their business problem, which they've started with, and filter the ideas against the business problem. And in pretty much every time I have done this, a great idea raises its hand. There is the group coalesces around the idea. The idea is felt to solve the problem and then forms the basis of the creative brief. And once you have that agreement, each one of the specialists that are sitting in on this session can go away and execute in their own particular area of expertise. The copywriter can write the copy, the app developer can do the app, the media planner can develop the media plan, and so on and so forth.
So let me, it sounds like magic beans and magic beanstalk, and I'm a big believer in what you do, Vivek. So let's start off there. In our conversation before, and leading up to our conversation, you said I have a very contrarian view, or it's a very different point of view, and you kind of were a little more diplomatic on air than you were before about explaining how broken the process is. So let's unpack a little bit everything that you said. So first, about the process being broken, and earlier you mentioned, and I agree with this, by the way, 100%. Like I've said, from the time a project gets initiated to the time the commercial hits the air or the advertising starts running, there's 10,000 decisions made, probably more. And each one of those decisions, if you were to draw out a decision tree, it either improves the idea or makes it worse. But the reality is that 99% of the decisions made along that decision tree don't make the idea better, they make it worse. So I agree with you that the process is broken and that it's inefficient. Talking about eliminating the creative brief as we know it, talk to us a little bit more about that, because what we're talking about is foregoing the traditional creative brief, right, and bringing the right people into the room, kind of doing a rapid prototyping of ideas on a kind of a team basis, and then doing that rapid prototyping, generating a lot of bad ideas, right? With the idea that within those bad ideas, there's going to be a handful of really good ideas and probably one outstanding, brilliant idea. Talk to us a little bit more about that process.
Well, to build on your comment about the different iterations that happen within the process, all of this happens within a limited time frame. So every bit of rework that you have to do, you don't get more time to do it. You're still working with the same amount of time you have. So the level of pressure increases exponentially. And with the level of pressure also comes the very natural tendency to compromise and say, it's not great, but I don't have a lot of time, so let me just move on. So that doesn't help. So what I am suggesting is not eliminating the brief. What I'm suggesting is no longer using the brief as the trigger for the creative work. Rather, it's finding the winning idea and then distilling elements of the winning idea in the brief that is going to become the document that provides direction for us, but we've all agreed on it. And the creative agrees because he thinks that it's an inspiring idea and he can work on it. The planner agrees because he thinks the idea is grounded in insight. The account manager agrees because within the real world of the client, this idea can fly. So all of these buy-ins are very important, and they're reflected in that document that is in some sense the contact report that's developed after we've done the briefing session and we've captured the most important elements of the idea on a document.
So are you saying, Vivek, that the creative brief then becomes not so much the inspirational touch point, but the executional work order?
The product of this meeting.
It's the product of the meeting, and the idea, the brief will only be approved by the creative. The idea that is used to develop the brief will only be approved by the creative if he thinks it's inspiring enough.
But I guess my first question is, does it become superfluous?
Does the brief become superfluous?
Yeah, if you've got the idea, if you've got the creative idea and the creative knows how to execute on it, what else do I need? Speaking as a creative, a former creative, as a former copywriter, if we've got the great idea or the big idea or the idea that we all agree on, what else do I need?
Well, in this session, you may not need anything, but over time, team members are going to change, clients are going to change, and we can't run the risk of changing a winning idea every time a key member of the team changes. And I think that's one of the problems that we run into currently, that whenever someone moves along, someone replaces them and wants to impact the work, and so the idea changes,
So
and that affects the brand.
So what you're saying then is you're trying to avoid the telephone game. You want to have something written down so that we don't forget what it is that we were originally excited about. But that still doesn't mean it's a creative brief. It's more of a work order with instructions on it.
No, I think it becomes a living document to guide future ideation, to remind people of the agreement that was made, right? That's the way I'm envisioning it. Now, this conversation, or this question you just had, Howard, sparked kind of another idea in me, which is, and we've talked about this a lot, you and I, Howard, about collaboration between agency and client. So let's say in this particular case, the client is not involved in this ideation, in this example, hypothetical, that having the product of this ideation be the creative brief, let's say, the idea, we have the idea, and creatives are already sparking and coming up with ideas. Now we can codify that into a more traditional form that we can go and sell the client while our guys are already working, right? And we still have the benefit that at least internally in the agency, everyone is aligned, which also may help with the selling it in to the client. Now, granted, and you mentioned earlier, Vivek, offline, that there are occasions where the client is involved, but when they're not involved, I think that then the brief becomes even more important, because it's that covenant that everybody, at least on the agency side, says, this is an idea that we all are excited about, think is right for the business, and here it is, Mr. Client.
Well, I think the client will give you a document of some sort, whatever he refers to as a brief. And within that document, there will be a business problem that he's looking to solve. Whatever the agency does internally to come up with a solution, before they present it to the client, they have to be sure that it passes the filter of the business problem that needs to be solved that was written in the client document.
Yes.
Now, involving the client in approving internal documents, I don't think is a great idea, because
you don't have to sell me on that. But again, it's the nature of a lot of our realities as strategists, is that the client has someone at some point told the client that they need to be approving creative briefs. I don't agree with that. I agree with you. The client gives you their version of a brief, and then it should be up to us. And once we agree to that, we might not agree to it, but if we agree to it, then it should be up to us to deliver to that brief using whatever techniques, forms, brainstorms, whatever we decide to come up with as an agency, and they shouldn't get in the way, because I have, and this is the debate me and Howard have had, I just feel that we're parsing words and we're debating the wrong thing. We're not looking at ideas, we're debating a form.
And you're allowing people who are not trained in exactly what needs to be done on a creative basis to influence that document. So
a man after my own heart.
I don't think that's a smart thing. I think that's just inviting trouble.
Well, but that's the way of the world.
Trouble.
I mean, I've been in the business since 85, 84, 85. And I retired in, was it 2012, but I've been still involved in the business as an educator and working with mostly clients. So, that's the other distinction that Henry and I talk about a lot. I'm working with clients, with brand people who want to develop a creative brief for themselves that they can deliver to the agency. So they want to know the techniques of how do you come up with a good proposition, a good single-minded proposition. And what I'm hearing is you saying, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, so we can, parse out what the advantages are to your system. And we talked about this a little bit before, is that how do you get the creatives to play in the sandbox with people who are not creatives and not have a turf war?
Well, a couple of things. I think the client can develop whatever document he wants written, however he likes to write his creative briefs, and give it to the agency. And as far as the client is concerned, that is the creative brief. I don't think it makes any sense to involve the client in the internal workings of the agency any further, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is important for this to work, and again, to get the creatives to play nicely with everyone, is to clarify that what we are looking for is a creative idea. We are not developing executions of any sort within this this exercise. So an account management person will never be writing copy, and a planner will never be doing art direction. So that is the
wishing
sole
made it
preserve.
so. If wishing made it so.
That is the sole preserve of the creative. And also, I think there's a high level of frustration in the creative community with briefs in general. It's not like they're getting great stuff right now. So if we can get them to try this once and convince them that, hey, this is a better way of working. It's more fun, it's more collaborative, and I get more inspiration from it. Why not? A lot of the briefs that circulate in the industry, as far as I'm concerned, are 90% information and 10% inspiration. And what we need to do is flip that. We need 90% inspiration, 10% information. In fact, creatives don't need a lot of information to create, but they do need inspiration.
Yeah. Well, I guess well, correct me if I'm wrong, because what I'm hearing you saying is that this is kind of reverse engineering the brief.
Yeah.
You know, I do an exercise all the time in my workshop where we figure out a brief by looking at the creative as a way of getting people to get into the mindset of a brief writer. Can we figure out from the creative who were they talking to? What was the single-minded proposition? Is it possible to figure out an insight?
Agreed.
And I often say that brilliant creative telegraphs the brief.
I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. And I would say that what you're actually putting on air is the work. It's not the brief, right? So the thing that matters is what goes on air. So at the end of the day, the brief is the means to get there, or is a means to get there, but it's not the end product. And a lot of great advertising, I shouldn't say this, but a lot of great advertising has been developed with crappy briefs, or with no briefs at all.
Yes.
Or with no briefs at all.
100%.
Yeah.
Listen, I use an analogy all the time, which is, to me, a brief writer or a strategist is like the hitting coach on a baseball team. These players are professional. They can hit home runs without my coaching. They got to this league on their own talent. Now, a good hitting coach, along with a hitter who is coachable, the hitting coach is helping and helps raise the batting average. And if you know baseball, you know that if you raise your bat, if you get, one more hit out of 10, you go from being a 300 hitter to being a 400 hitter. That's, you're basically in the Ted Williams, range. You're an all-time Hall of Famer. So it's really about improving percentages, helping creatives see some blind spots that they might have, and helping out in the process. But absolutely, I think, in fact, most good creative or great creative is probably coming out of mediocre to bad briefs, if there's any brief at all, simply because I don't think there's a ton of great brief writers out there.
Right. And my thought was, as a creative, I was expected to hit the home run, to continue with the analogy, whether I had a good brief, a bad brief, or no brief. That was the expectation.
I love this baseball analogy, and I would tweak it just a little bit. I don't think the brief or the planner is the batting coach, Henry. I think a good brief is a soft ball that's right down the middle, so that the batter can hit a home run. He knows how to swing, but this is a very easy pitch to hit for a home run.
I love that. I love that, because the idea isn't supposed to make it hard for creatives. It's supposed to make it easy.
Of course. Of
Give
course.
give me what I need, which is what you were saying before. It's 90% information and only 10% inspiration, and it needs to be reversed. Exactly. Wow. Okay. So now, tell us about how is this going over? How is this being received when you go out and you offer this new technique?
Well, there is resistance initially because it's so out of left field. Again, with the baseball analogies, um, it's there's creatives that mistrust the process, account management people who recuse themselves because they know nothing about ideas themselves. There's planners who feel threatened because that's their domain. But there's a lot of frustration around the process right now. So there's a collective understanding that, hey, we need to do something differently. So once I actually get to that point and I get a chance to do things differently, once I get people to run through this exercise with me, they become believers. They happily get on board.
So I'm discouraged, Vivek, because I see the merit in what you're proposing, and I could see myself in one of these meetings and coming up, with 50, ideas from which, we find 2 or 3 that are really brilliant and that we can all get excited, or maybe even the one that we all are excited about. I just don't know that a lot of client organizations or even agencies are able to depart from established models so readily.
I agree, particularly because this is what I am preaching right now is advertising sedition.
Heresy.
It's heresy. This is going against existing orthodoxies, right?
Yeah.
And it's not easy, but I think the best way to approach this is to find a small project, a brand that is in trouble, that has no money or time, and a brand manager that is looking to make a difference. And once you find that, you do it, you get good results. Once you get the good results, you have a case study, first of all. Secondly, you have someone on the client side who is willing to champion this within his organization. And you probably will also have a creative department that has seen the worth of this way of working. So the next time, the next project that is put on the table to be handled in this manner, it'll be easier to sell through. And after a while, the ball will get rolling and things will change. But again, it has to be from the bottom up. This can't come from the top down.
You know what? Yeah. Thinking about it, I think a new business pitch is a good opportunity to do this, right? Because you have the compressed time frame. Everybody's busy working on other stuff, right? On existing clients. So kind of having this meeting where everybody comes out of it like energized and rallying around an idea, I think that's a really good way for people to see the value in an approach like this.
I agree, and I would go a step further because one of the worst things that can happen in a pitch is a day before you don't see the work until the day before the presentation, and it turns out that the work is not up to par, and you have to improvise something in 24 hours. You don't get enough sleep. You go in and do a crappy presentation, and you don't feel good about yourself. The big difference here within the process is that on day 1 of the pitch, you already have a good idea what the idea that you're going to be presenting looks like. So you can actually spend more time on preparing how you're going to sell it, on preparing the delivery of the materials, on dressing up the pitch, than to actually have to worry about whether the idea is right 24 hours before.
Oh, I agree. That's a great point, because I remember when pitches, we were always waiting for the account planner to produce his or her magic before we could get started. And this, I think, jumpstarts that whole process. The brief doesn't have to, we don't have to wait for the brief. The brief emerges through the process. Now, I understand Henry's disconcertion. Is that a word? His disconcertedness. I guess that's the word. I understand his discouragement. I think that was the word.
That's how they say it in South Florida.
Oh, God. Like,
But I think I take an opposite view. I think this is an exciting process. I'm never been one to be afraid of change, and that's really what got me into the whole process and the whole thinking about writing creative briefs. How do I go about writing briefs? Because I was a creative. I wasn't trained in writing briefs, but I was so frustrated with bad briefs that I wanted to figure out how to do this so I could share it with others. And because I spent a lot of time in direct marketing, I value the analytical side and the measurement side, as well as the creative side. So I see this as a new thing, we always talk about the new and shiny is sometimes taking over, for the stuff for old reliable things. But this comes down to benefiting from old reliable, which is group work that comes up with great ideas and can put aside the ego. That's why I advocate collaborative work and putting it together a creative brief. I'm excited about this.
I want to add one thing real quick. Because I know Vivek and I've been in some workshops with him. I need to add that this isn't just about putting people in a room and doing the old type of brainstorm.
No.
Vivek has very specific techniques that he uses to generate these ideas on a rapid basis, and that ultimately the winning ideas are going to be high quality ideas. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to oversimplify this and make it sound like this is a magic bullet that anybody can implement without any training. And frankly, that's what Vivek does, is he trains people how to do these things. So I want to give him his fair due. Vivek, you talked about it being a way to get on the same page early in a pitch process.
Yep.
So that you could spend the rest of the time selling creative. I'd love to keep you for another episode where we could talk about selling creative, because I know that's another topic that you're very well versed in. In fact, that was one of the workshops that I did with you, was a selling creative workshop. So a lot to talk about. This has been great. We've probably gone well over what we normally go over. And I know that we could speak for hours on topics like this. So unless you have anything else, Howard, I think we wrap this one up.
I agree. This has been great having you, Vivek. Thanks so much. And we hope to do it again.
It's been fun. Thank you. And I would love to continue this conversation.
Okay, Howard, it's time to look at another piece of creative and review it. You sent me a link to an Ad Age article about a piece for Core Down, which is an Italian Down syndrome organization. Let's watch it right now.
The baker had Simone, and everybody saw that she could do the job. The lawyer went to the baker and saw Simone at work. The lawyer hired John because the baker hired Simone. The baker hired Simone. The dentist went to the lawyer and saw John at work. The dentist hired Sophia because the lawyer hired John, because the baker hired Simone. The baker hired Simone. The farmer went to the dentist and saw Sophia at work. The farmer hired Kate because the dentist hired Sophia, because the lawyer hired John, because the baker hired Simone. The baker had Simone. The barber went to the farmer and saw Kate at work. The barber had Paul because the farmer had Kate, because the dentist had Sophia, because the lawyer had John, because the baker had Simone. The baker had Simone. The baker went to the barber and saw Paul at work. He didn't have a clue, but it was thanks to his first move that the barber hired Paul, because the farmer hired Kate, because the dentist had Sophia, because the lawyer hired John, because the baker had Simone. The baker had Simone. The baker had Simone. Yeah.
Okay, so Howard, You sent me this. I looked at it and I definitely said, let's talk about this one in the episode today. Tell me what your initial impressions are, what you think about this work from an agency called Small, I believe. Go ahead.
Yeah, Henry, I love this spot. This is a public service announcement. It's not likely to ever air on, above the line broadcast. This is going to show up on websites for the variety of different organizations around Europe, the United States, around the world that provide support for Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome. I don't have a direct connection to this, although my late brother was developmentally disabled and he died at a young age from a drowning accident. So I have I just have a huge open heart for any group of or organization that does work with people who are challenged in any way. This was a powerful message for me. I've seen lots of public service announcements, but what really grabbed me about this one were two things. One was the music. To get Sting to write an original piece of music was a huge contribution to this. The second was the repetitive nature of this kind of message. It's like the circle of life. One action influences another action, influences another action. So from a creative perspective, I think it was a great idea. And that's one of the reasons why I loved it. What were your thoughts?
Well, I got to tell you, I was moved to tears. A little personal insight. I have a son who's on the autism spectrum. And one of the things that as a parent of a child with disabilities that you worry about is their ability to be independent, to have a job, to, cash a paycheck and do those things that, we all take for granted. At 16, I had my first job, and you wonder about that with your kids. And this obviously does a great job of highlighting that these people have a role to play in our society and they can develop skills and they can do things that contribute to society. So I thought it was incredibly moving. Another thing that I think I really liked about it, beyond the things that you mentioned, Sting, I'm big fan of the Police, is that a lot of public service announcements, tone-wise, can be downers, right? Like no pun intended. And this takes really a more joyful tone. And it gives you an optimistic and it makes you feel good. So I really like that about it. And in the and I mentioned that because a tone is something we talk about regarding briefs all the time, right? And I had actually a nonprofit that we did a brief for last year. And one of the things that I put was that I left the tone open because I didn't want to prejudice the creatives toward a specific tone. But I told them, I said, I know that with this particular nonprofit, there's a doom and gloom tone that often comes through with this particular issue. Think about optimistically what happens if we solve this issue. There could be a positive side to it. So I see them here. They executed it actually in a very optimistic and positive tone. The other thing that I really just loved was a little executional detail was when the baker goes to the barber at the end and he sees the guy, the Down syndrome gentleman, washing the hair of one of the clients, and he notices it. And the song says he doesn't know that he caused the chain to start, which to me is kind of like, the things that we do that create positive change, a lot of times we're not even aware of it, but you got to put the good vibes out there. You got to do the right things, and eventually, karmically, it's going to come back around. So it came back around very close to him, and he didn't realize that he had been the genesis. So very magical, I thought, story there.
Definitely. Well, good stuff, Henry. He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.